Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused, unsure, even though you were certain about what just happened? You knew what was said, you knew how it made you feel. And yet somehow, minutes later, you were questioning your own memory. That's not weakness. That's not overthinking. That's something much deeper. Today we're talking about gaslighting, what it is, how to recognize it, and most importantly, how to respond without losing yourself in the process. Gaslighting is not disagreement, it is reality manipulation, and the difference between the two is subtle but life-changing. In a normal disagreement, two people can see the same moment differently and still respect that the other person's experience exists. You can argue about facts, interpretations, or emotions, but there is a shared understanding that both people are allowed to have their own version of what happened. Gaslighting breaks that understanding. Instead of saying, "I see it differently," the gaslighter says, "That didn't happen. You're remembering it wrong," or "You're imagining things," and the goal is not to express a different perspective, but to erase yours. This is what makes gaslighting so dangerous. When someone simply disagrees with you, you might feel frustrated or unheard, but you don't lose your grip on yourself. When someone manipulates your reality, you begin to question your own mind. You start replaying conversations, wondering if you misheard, misremembered, or misunderstood. Over time, this creates a quiet kind of panic because the one place you should feel safe, your own perception, starts to feel unreliable. Reality manipulation works because it is usually wrapped in confidence. The person doing it speaks with certainty, authority, or emotional force. They may sound calm while you feel upset, which makes you look like the unstable one. They may use phrases that sound reasonable, like "you're overreacting," or "you're too sensitive," or "that's not what I meant," which shifts the focus away from what was said or done and places it onto your emotional response. The more you try to explain yourself, the more you end up defending your sanity instead of addressing the original issue. What makes this even more confusing is that gaslighting often comes from people you care about. It can be a partner, a parent, a boss, or a close friend. Because you want to believe they mean well, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You assume the misunderstanding must be your fault. Slowly, you begin to rely on their version of events more than your own because it feels safer to doubt yourself than to accept that someone you trust might be manipulated. Disagreement respects reality, even when it challenges it. Gaslighting attacks reality itself. One invites dialogue, the other creates distortion. When your experience is constantly dismissed, minimized, or rewritten, you are no longer just having a conflict. You are being trained to abandon your own truth in favor of someone else's narrative, and that is how control replaces connection. Confusion is the first red flag because it is the earliest emotional signal that something in the conversation is not healthy or balanced. When you walk away from an interaction feeling foggy, uncertain, or strangely unsettled, that feeling is not random. In normal communication, even when there is conflict, you usually leave with a clear understanding of where you stand. You might feel upset, disappointed, or even angry, but you know what happened and why you feel the way you do. Confusion, on the other hand, feels different. It is the sense that the ground beneath you has shifted, that what you were sure about moments ago now feels shaky and unclear. This kind of confusion often appears when someone subtly rewrites what just happened. He might bring up something that hurt you, and instead of addressing it, the other person changes the story. They may say they never said it that way, that you misunderstood their tone, or that you are making a big deal out of nothing. You remember the moment clearly, yet their response makes you pause. You start to wonder if maybe you are wrong. That pause is where gaslighting begins to take root. The human brain is wired to seek coherence. When two versions of reality collide, the mind wants to resolve the tension. If the other person speaks with confidence or authority, it becomes easier to doubt yourself than to keep holding onto your own memory. This is especially true when you value the relationship. You don't want to believe someone you care about would intentionally distort the truth, so your brain chooses the more comfortable explanation that you must be mistaken. Confusion becomes the emotional price you pay to preserve the connection. Over time, this repeated confusion changes how you relate to yourself. You start checking with others before trusting your own feelings. You might say things like, "Maybe I'm overthinking," or "I'm probably just too sensitive," not because it is true, but because it has been suggested to you so many times that it feels familiar. The more this happens, the more your inner voice grows quiet, replaced by a constant second guessing that drains your confidence and clarity. What makes confusion such a powerful red flag is that it shows the conversation is no longer about understanding, but about control. When someone wants to connect, they try to make things clearer. When someone wants to dominate the narrative, they muddy the waters. They introduce doubt, contradictions, and emotional disorientation so you lose your footing. That fog keeps you focused on trying to figure out what is real instead of noticing that something is wrong in the first place. The goal of gaslighting is control, not truth, and understanding this changes the way you see every confusing or painful interaction. When someone is truly interested in the truth, they are willing to listen, to consider another point of view, and to adjust their understanding if new information appears. Even if they disagree with you, there is still a basic respect for facts and feelings. Gaslighting does not operate that way. It is not about discovering what really happened or how someone actually feels. It is about maintaining power by shaping the story so that it always benefits the person doing the manipulating. Control feels safer to someone who gaslights because it protects them from accountability. If they can convince you that your memory is faulty, your feelings are exaggerated, or your reactions are unreasonable, then they never have to take responsibility for what they did. They don't have to apologize. They don't have to change. They simply have to keep you unsure. Every time you doubt yourself, their position becomes stronger. Your uncertainty becomes their shield. This is why arguments with a gaslighter feel endless and exhausting. You think you are trying to reach understanding, but they are trying to keep the upper hand. They may shift the topic, twist your words, or suddenly play the victim. The conversation is not moving toward resolution, because resolution would mean clarity, and clarity would threaten their control. Instead, the interaction becomes a maze where you are constantly defending, explaining, and justifying yourself while they keep redefining the rules. The need for control often comes from insecurity or fear. If someone feels fragile inside, they may try to manage the outside world to avoid feeling exposed. By controlling the narrative, they can avoid facing their own mistakes, shame, or vulnerability. Instead of dealing with discomfort honestly, they push it onto you. You become the one who feels unstable, guilty, or confused, while they get to feel powerful and certain. This dynamic slowly changes the balance of the relationship. You may find yourself walking on eggshells, choosing your words carefully, or avoiding topics that could trigger another round of distortion. Your focus shifts from expressing yourself to managing their reactions. That is control at work. It is not loud or obvious at first. It grows quietly through repeated moments where your reality is questioned and theirs is enforced. When you see that gaslighting is about control rather than truth, it becomes easier to understand why no amount of logic ever seems to fix it. You are trying to be understood while they are trying to stay in charge, and as long as power matters more to them than honesty, the truth will always be something they are willing to bend. When you begin to doubt your own memory and instincts, it often happens so slowly that you barely notice it at first. In the beginning, you might feel completely certain about what you saw, heard, or experienced. You remember the tone of their voice, the words they used, the way the moment made you feel. But when that reality is questioned again and again, something inside you starts to shift. You replay conversations in your head, not to understand them, but to check whether you are allowed to believe them. That constant mental reviewing becomes exhausting, and it slowly erodes your trust in yourself. Your instincts are designed to protect you. They alert you when something feels wrong, when a boundary has been crossed, or when someone's behavior does not match their words. Gaslighting targets those instincts directly. By telling you that you are wrong, dramatic, forgetful, or confused, the other person teaches you to override your own internal signals. You start ignoring the discomfort in your chest or the tightness in your stomach because you have been trained to think those feelings are unreliable. Over time, you stop listening to the part of you that knows something is off. Memory plays a powerful role in how we understand ourselves and our relationships. When someone repeatedly challenges your memory, it feels like they are reaching into your mind and rearranging the furniture. You might think, maybe I did misremember, maybe I took it the wrong way, maybe I'm not as clear as I thought. That doubt can spread beyond one situation and into others. You may begin to question past events, your interpretations, and even your identity. Who are you if you cannot trust what you experience? This kind of self-doubt does not come from being weak. It comes from being exposed to repeated emotional pressure. When someone you care about insists that your version of reality is wrong, your brain tries to maintain the relationship by adjusting its own beliefs. It feels safer to doubt yourself than to accept that someone you love or depend on might be distorting the truth, so you start giving their words more weight than your own perceptions. As this continues, you may notice that you hesitate before speaking. You might say things like, "I'm not sure," or "maybe I'm wrong," even when you used to be confident. Your inner voice grows quieter while the other person's voice grows louder. The more you rely on them to define what is real, the more you drift away from your own clarity, until your thoughts feel less like your own and more like echoes of what you have been told to believe. Gaslighters avoid accountability because taking responsibility would force them to face the impact of their behavior, and that is exactly what they are trying to escape. When someone is willing to be accountable, they can say things like, "I was wrong, I hurt you," or "I should have handled that differently." Those words require humility and emotional maturity. A gaslighter, however, is invested in protecting their image and their sense of control, so instead of acknowledging a mistake, they look for ways to redirect the focus away from themselves. This redirection can take many forms. They might deny that the event even happened or claim you are exaggerating it. They might shift the blame onto you by saying that your reaction is the real problem, not their behavior. They might bring up unrelated issues from the past to confuse the conversation, dilute the original concern. Each of these tactics serves the same purpose, which is to avoid having to sit with discomfort or take responsibility for harm caused. When accountability is avoided, the conversation becomes distorted. You might come into the discussion wanting to resolve something specific, but you leave feeling like you are the one on trial. Instead of talking about what they did, you are suddenly explaining why you feel the way you feel, why you brought it up, or why you are not being unreasonable. This subtle shift puts you in a defensive position while they remain untouched by any scrutiny. The more you defend yourself, the less they have to answer for their actions. Avoiding accountability also allows patterns to continue. If someone never admits fault, nothing ever changes. Apologies become rare or non-existent. Growth becomes impossible. The same hurtful behaviors repeat, and each time you try to address them, you are met with denial, minimization, or emotional manipulation. Over time, you may start to feel hopeless, as if no matter how carefully you speak or how gently you approach the issue, it never leads to real resolution. This is where the emotional toll becomes heavy. You may begin to internalize the blame, thinking that maybe you are too demanding, too sensitive, or too difficult. That internalization keeps the gaslighter safe from self-reflection while you carry the weight of the relationship's problems. It creates an uneven dynamic where one person is always being evaluated and the other is always being protected. True accountability requires honesty and vulnerability. Gaslighting rejects both. It replaces them with deflection and distortion, keeping the focus away from what actually happened and onto anything that prevents responsibility from being taken. Allowing the person to maintain their sense of power and avoid facing the truth of their own behavior. Emotional exhaustion is a warning sign because it reveals how deeply gaslighting drains your inner resources over time. At first, you might only feel tired after certain conversations, like something about them takes more out of you than it should. You may replay what was said, trying to understand where things went wrong, or why you suddenly feel so unsettled. That mental effort requires energy, and when it happens again and again, it slowly wears you down. You are not just tired from talking, you are tired from trying to hold on to your own reality in the face of constant distortion. This exhaustion often comes from being stuck in a cycle of explaining and defending yourself. Every time you express a feeling or point out a problem, you are met with denial, minimization, or blame. So you try again using different words, different tones, hoping that maybe this time you will be understood. Each attempt feels like pushing against a wall that never moves. Over time, that constant emotional labor creates a deep sense of fatigue that sleep alone cannot fix. Your nervous system also feels the impact. When you do not know what version of reality will be presented to you, your body stays on high alert. You may feel tense before conversations, anxious during them, and drained afterward. That stress response keeps pumping through your system, leaving you feeling worn out, irritable, or numb. Emotional exhaustion is not just in your mind. It shows up in your body as headaches, tight shoulders, shallow breathing, and a general sense of being overwhelmed. As this continues, you might notice that your motivation fades. Things that once brought you joy start to feel like too much effort. You may withdraw from friends or activities because you do not have the energy to explain what you are going through. Even simple decisions can feel heavy when your inner clarity has been eroded by constant questioning and self-doubt. The world starts to feel smaller, not because you want it to, but because you are running on empty. This kind of exhaustion is a powerful signal that something is wrong in the way you are being treated. Healthy relationships can be challenging, but they do not leave you feeling emotionally depleted and hollow. When every interaction feels like a battle for your own sense of truth, your system is pushed beyond what it can sustain. That awareness is not a flaw in you. It is the cost of being caught in an environment where your reality is repeatedly undermined and your emotional energy is consumed by the effort to stay grounded in what you know to be true. Here are both expansions written in the same calm, grounded style you asked for. You don't need proof to trust your experience because what you feel and remember is already real, even if no one else agrees with it. Gaslighting trains you to believe that only what can be verified, documented, or approved by someone else counts as truth. You start thinking that unless you can quote exact words, show messages, or provide witnesses, your reality is somehow invalid. But your nervous system does not require evidence to know when something felt wrong. Your body reacts before your mind ever starts searching for logic. When something hurts, it leaves an imprint. It shows up as tension, sadness, anger, or confusion. Those reactions are not imaginary. They are signals that something happened that did not feel safe, respectful, or fair. Gaslighting works by making you believe that unless you can prove the event in a courtroom sense, you have no right to acknowledge it. This puts you in an impossible position because most emotional harm does not come with receipts. It happens in tone, in looks, in timing, and in what was left unsaid. When you are repeatedly asked to justify your feelings, you begin to disconnect from them. You start translating your emotions into arguments, hoping that if you sound reasonable enough, you will be taken seriously. But emotions are not debates to be won. They are experiences to be honored. The need to constantly prove yourself pulls you further away from your inner knowing and closer to the version of reality someone else is trying to impose on you. Trusting your experience means giving weight to what you felt even when it is inconvenient for others. It means allowing yourself to say, "This didn't feel right," even if you cannot explain it perfectly. Gaslighters thrive when you doubt yourself because doubt creates dependence. When you stop requiring outside validation for your inner truth, their influence weakens. This is not about rejecting facts or ignoring logic. It is about recognizing that your lived experience is a form of truth that deserves respect. You do not need permission to feel hurt. You do not need a transcript to remember what affected you. When you trust yourself, you reclaim the authority over your own story, and that authority cannot be taken from you by someone who insists that only their version of events counts. The strongest response to gaslighting is clarity and boundaries, because those two things remove the space where manipulation thrives. Gaslighting depends on confusion, on blurred lines, on endless debates about what was said and what was meant. When you bring clarity into the conversation, you stop feeding that fog. You name what you experienced in simple, grounded language. You do not over-explain. You do not argue about your feelings. You state them as facts of your inner world. Clarity sounds like saying, "I remember it differently," or "that comment hurt me," or "I'm not comfortable with how this is being framed." It does not try to convince the other person that they are wrong. It simply stands in what you know. This kind of clarity is powerful because it is steady. It does not rise or fall based on the other person's reactions. It stays rooted in your experience. Boundaries are what protect that clarity. A boundary is not a threat or a punishment. It is a limit that defines what you will and will not engage with. When someone keeps twisting your words or denying your reality, a boundary might look like ending the conversation, changing the subject, or stepping away. It might mean saying, "I'm not going to keep discussing this if my experience is being dismissed." That boundary shifts the focus from proving something to protecting yourself. Gaslighters want you to stay in the loop of explaining and defending. Boundaries break that loop. They signal that your emotional safety matters more than winning an argument. Over time, this changes the dynamic. You stop chasing understanding from someone who refuses to offer it. You stop giving your energy to conversations that only drain you. Clarity keeps you grounded. Boundaries keep you safe. Together, they create a space where manipulation cannot easily take hold. When you are clear about what you feel and firm about what you will tolerate, you no longer have to fight for your reality. You simply live inside it, steady and self-trusting, even when someone else tries to rewrite it. Gaslighting works by pulling you away from yourself, from what you know, what you feel, and what you remember. It thrives on confusion, self-doubt, and the quiet erosion of your inner voice. But once you can recognize that something powerful shifts, you stop trying to prove your reality and start protecting it. You learn that your experience does not need permission to exist, that your feelings are not negotiable, and that clarity is stronger than any manipulation. When you choose to trust yourself, set boundaries, and stand steady in your truth, you take back the control that was never meant to be given away.